Hey everybody, welcome back. In this video, we're going to continue the discussion on talking about various lifestyle changes that we can make that can better improve our cognitive function. And in particular, I think it's important to emphasize that when we keep on talking about people that are struggling with these cognitive challenges, this whole series that we're doing right now is talking about just whenever these cognitive challenges are due to neuroinflammation, because there's a multitude of other things that may lead you to experience some sort of cognitive decline. But it's important to emphasize that in this video series and in the ones before this, we're talking about cognitive decline in regards to inflammation in your brain. And if you want to learn more about how that happened, that you actually got inflammation in your brain, check out the videos before this. My name is Dr. Matthew Shem. I'm the owner of Peak Brain Performance Centers here in Colorado Springs. And remember, we talked about how in the brain, we have these different types of cells, neurons and glial cells. And glial cells, how they make up the majority of the cells inside of the brain. We also talked about how there's a bunch of different types of glial cells. And more importantly, we're talking about microglial cells in the current lecture at the moment, right? And what were microglial cells? Microglial cells are these cells that kind of scavenge around the brain and look for debris and kind of clean up all the mess. And it's also important to know that whenever we have this inflammatory aspects in the brain, these microglia are responsible for making the antioxidants in the brain that then go and dampen down that inflammatory response. But under chronic inflammatory conditions, these microglia become depleted. And so we talked about how that then starts this vicious cycle where the inflammatory cascade just continues to build and build. And we also talked about how when microglia get primed and all the different reasons that microglia may become primed. And we talked about how whenever microglia get primed, they lose those feet that they have. So they become now this less diverse structure, and it leads to where they don't have the ability to kind of maneuver as easily and scavenge around the brain to look for debris. And we also talked about how whenever your microglia become primed, we want to get them into this M1 state, or we want to get them out of this M1 state, out of the pro-inflammatory category and into the M2 state, which is the anti-inflammatory category. So we want to dampen down the inflammatory response as much as we can. So now tying into sleep. In this study, what they did is they took some mice and they wanted to try to mimic a situation where people are typically sleep deprived. And so what they thought of is think about the hospital. And think about specifically people in the critical care unit and how those people are often sleep deprived because of the chaotic and loud environment that unit may be. And so what they did is they put these mice into cages that rocked and swayed back and forth. And they also put balls inside of the cage, so it would make this kind of noise. And it just leads to more of a resemblance of the hospital critical care unit. And what they found was that they have established an animal model of sleep disturbances in mice and found that 24 hours of sleep disturbance increases pro-inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, and that is what we were talking about before, being the M1 versus M2 state. IL-6, pro-inflammatory cytokines, turn on M1, that pro-inflammatory microglial priming. Sleep disturbance also induces microglial activation in the mouse hippocampus, but not in the mouse cortex. Finally, sleep disturbance impairs hippocampus-dependent learning and memory. And so we talked about how this activation of microglial priming can lead to different types of learning and memory impairment. And this is just another study kind of consolidating it and backing our claims that whenever you do have this increase of inflammatory mediators in the brain, it can lead to impairment in your learning and memory centers. In this study, what they did is they took 4 experimental conditions. And so they took mice, and the first set of mice that they took, they spent a sleeping category. And so with these mice, they were allowed to get 75% of the previous 6 to 7 hours of sleep. Okay. So that was kind of the control group. In the second category, they used what they called spontaneously awake mice. And what those mice, that conditions that they were placed on, is the last 6 to 7 hours that they had were spent, 70% of those 6 to 7 hours were spent awake. And the next one, they did acutely sleep deprived mice. And what those mice had going for them is that they were not allowed to sleep for the last 8 hours. And what would happen is that whenever they would start to feel a little drowsy, or whenever they looked like they were a little drowsy, they would start tapping on the glass of their cage, right? And then the last group was chronically sleep restricted. And so these mice were not allowed to sleep for 4.5 days. And what they also did with this group is that they put them on these wheels where they had to be moving. And underneath this wheel was a little body of water. And so it basically kept them to where they had to continuously move, otherwise they would fall into the water. And what they found in this study was that chronic sleep restriction, but not acute sleep loss, activates microglia, promotes their phagocytic activity, and does so in the absence of overt signs of neuroinflammation, suggesting that, like many other stressors, extended sleep disruption may lead to a state of sustained microglia activation, perhaps increasing the brain's susceptibility to other forms of damage. So again, just another confirmatory study talking about how whenever we don't sleep, it's not good for our brain. And then the last study here, in this one, what they did is they split the groups up into sleep deprived and chronic sleep deprived. And what they did for the chronic sleep deprived is that they allowed these rats. They weren't allowed to sleep from the hours of 10 a.m. or from 4 p.m. to 10 a.m. And then they were allowed to sleep from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Okay. And then what they found in this study was that the current data suggests that inflammatory mediators increased during chronic sleep deprivation. So they're already showing that you increase this inflammatory response if you're not sleeping very well. And this can trigger the activation of glial and microglial cells in discrete brain regions. This may explain the higher anxiety levels and learning and memory impairment associated with chronic sleep deprivation, and may prove to be the potential targets to develop effective therapeutic interventions to overcome these strategies, or overcome these conditions. So now the question becomes, how do I get more sleep? So I hope that those articles kind of demonstrated to you just the importance of sleep. And so now the number one most common cause for somebody not being able to sleep, whether it being trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, or maybe just not getting enough sleep, not feeling rested whenever you wake up, is because of dysglycemia. Dysglycemia basically meaning that you have a disruption in your blood sugar regulation. And so I'm going to do a whole separate video on that and how different blood sugar regulations, whether it be insulin resistance or hypoglycemia, or whatever it may be, can lead you to either not being able to fall asleep, not being able to stay asleep, whatever. And we'll talk about all the mechanisms behind that and then what we can do about it. And then also there are some people who they have their palate suffocates them in the middle of the night because they don't have enough motor tone. And so those individuals, it may be a good idea to put them on a CPAP. But just talking about broad strategies that we can implement today is, for one, go to bed at the same time each night and get up at the same time each morning. Even on the weekends, try to make a routine out of it. Get up at the same time, go to sleep at the same time. The next thing is make sure your bedroom is quiet, dark, relaxing, and at a comfortable temperature. Nobody wants to be hot when they're sleeping, or at least I don't. Next thing is remove electronic devices such as TVs, computers, and smartphones from your bedroom. They emit blue light that kind of drives this dysregulation or disruption on our circadian rhythm that doesn't allow us to go to sleep. And then the next one is avoid large meals, caffeine, and alcohol before bedtime, because this is just going to mess with our blood sugar regulation, especially if you're eating large meals, and then your body has to go in overdrive to try and process those meals. And then lastly, get some exercise. Being physically active during the day can help you fall asleep more easily at night because you're burning all of this energy. So with that, I hope that that video kind of displays the importance of sleep and how the lack of sleep can drive these inflammatory mediators that then going to lead you to experience these cognitive issues like brain fog or learning and memory impairments and all this other stuff. And also kind of imply the importance of how important it is that if you're working with a provider that is only going to push supplements on you and push stuff like that, I'm just going to tell you these supplements to take and then everything's going to be hunky-dory. Well, while supplements are important, they're not nearly as important as changing your lifestyle. And sleep is one of those very, very important things, as well as exercise, which we talked about in the last video. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or call my office. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.